Good morning, Ugly Mug marketing friends and followers. Welcome to another edition of Ugly Mug Marketing Coffee Chats, the live show where we drink coffee, sometimes water or tea or other beverages, but we talk about marketing, leadership, business, and everything in between. My name is Hannah Balia, and I am the Director of Communications and Teaching here at Ugly Mug. And today I am joined by Ugly Mug Marketing founder, my boss, Wayne Mullins. Wayne is an avid reader. If you don't know Wayne is always reading a book or multiple books at one time. But he's really particularly been fascinated by productivity and time management. And this is a topic that he has been teaching on to a variety of different people and some in-person classes, even in our Ugly Mug Marketing office. But we recently touched on this in our team meeting, and I thought it would be a really relevant topic for so many of us. All of us have the same amount of time in a day, and yet some people accomplish more than others. Why is that? Let's dive into all the productivity hacks of the best leaders today with Wayne. Wayne, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to chat about something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to
I love this. There's so much goodness that we're about to dive into today. But for those people who don't know, like I said, Wayne is the owner and founder of Ugly Mug Marketing. But Wayne, tell us one thing that you're really looking forward to for Ugly Mug Marketing as a company this year in 2024.
I'm gonna go more short-sighted than long-term, but I always look forward to our quarterly team meetings, which we have one coming up in, I guess, in 3 weeks. So you'll be in town, Alex and Abby will be in town for a few extra days. So everyone will be together in the same place. So I always look forward to that. And then we also have an event coming up that's not publicly announced yet. I'm looking forward to that event.
We're getting the tea.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good event. I think could be wrong, but it'll probably be our largest event we've done in probably 2 or 3 years. So
yeah, really excited about that too. And what all you have in store, because I don't even know all the details yet.
I don't either.
Yeah. We're winging it. No, we're not totally winging it. We've done it before. We just need to parse through all the nitty-gritty details. But okay, the real reason that you're all tuning in here today, whether you're watching live or you're catching the replay, is to chat more about productivity and time management. I feel like this topic is relevant for anyone. This topic could be helpful, or our conversation today could be helpful if you are in college right now and you're going to be entering the workforce soon. This is relevant for you as an entrepreneur or a business owner. This is relevant for someone who is a part of a company, whether you're on the marketing team or at any level, because we all have to manage our time and we all want to have this balance of personal life, that dream and ideal work-life balance too, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But to kind of start things off, Wayne, what myths do you hear around time management and this idea of work-life balance?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. But, I think one of the big myths that I hear is the phrase that, quote unquote, I'm so busy, right? I think in Western culture, maybe just here in the States, but it's almost become a badge of honor, right? It's this thing that when somebody asks us, how are things going? It's like we kind of low key brag about how busy we are. Yeah. And what I believe to be true is that what we focus on expands. So when we focus on how busy we are, we get busier. Our plates get fuller and fuller. And mentally, there's a cost to that, right? There's a mental cost to constantly having so many things on our plate that keep piling up, whether that's work, whether that's personal, family, whatever the category may be. It just all seems to keep piling up on our plate. So number one is that whole idea of busyness as a badge. The other is this myth, in my opinion, of work-life balance. So I don't believe in work-life balance. And I know on the surface, that sounds very like, I want people to work 100 hours a week. Yeah. But that is not it. What I believe is more so about seasons. So in our personal lives, we go through seasons. In our business and our work and our relationship, there's all these different seasons. And that over time, those seasons fluctuate, and the demands for our attention and our time, vary based on the season that we find ourselves in. So, I believe that sometimes this whole idea of, when I'm at work, I feel like I should be at home spending time with the family. When I'm at home, I'm thinking about the 12 things I didn't get done at work today. And
Yeah.
so in the back of our brains, we think about it's supposed to be perfectly balanced, right? It should be in these boxes. And at least from my experience, that has never been the case. But there has always been seasons. And when I learned to look at it from that perspective versus, is it perfectly balanced? Do I have all of the spokes, perfectly filled in right now?
Yeah.
To me, that created way more stress. That created way more anxiety, anxiousness, because there was always something lacking, right? If work was demanding more of my time and attention, that means personal or family or whatever was lacking. And so then I would focus on that, and then I'd get more frustrated by the work stuff. And so it's
Yeah.
this never ending cycle, right? It's this negative feedback loop that I think it creates.
Yeah. That's so true. And I think that is so heightened too as a parent. And because you want to go home and you want to be present with your kids and you want to be present for your spouse. And yes, that like long list of things that you didn't get to or didn't get to that day. And then also I feel like sometimes I'll struggle with like, well, what did I do today then? Because maybe I wasn't being so efficient with my time. Like, did I focus too much on the wrong thing? Or, did I let my inbox dictate my day? And I feel like that comes down to how was I actually crafting my schedule for that day or for that week so that when I leave the office at the end of the day, I can be fully present and I can actually show up for my family and I can be the wife, that I want to be or the mom that I want to be for the very limited time that I get to see my daughter before she goes to bed at 7:00.
Yeah.
I wish I could go to bed at 7. I'm like, I want to be like fully with her. And so let's talk about how do we actually craft this perfect week. I really felt re-inspired because I know we talk about this a little bit when we're onboarding new employees on our team here at Ugly Mug about some strategies that we like to put in place in order to craft that ideal week. It doesn't always go to plan, but after that conversation at team meeting, I felt re-inspired by all of those things. And so let's talk about how we actually craft that perfect week. And then I want to touch on one thing that we talked about specifically around that, which was, and maybe you can lead with this, was intentional procrastination.
Yeah.
Because I think procrastinating is definitely something people can relate to as well in personal life and in professional life. So yeah, talk to us about how we can craft that perfect week and utilize procrastination to our benefit.
Absolutely. So first of all, I'm going to come back to procrastination, but what I will say is procrastination often has a negative connotation that gets carried with that.
Yes.
And when used correctly, procrastination can actually become a very empowering tool for you.
Yeah.
So before we dive into like, how do we actually structure this? I think it's important to understand how this loop of busyness tends to form in our work lives and our family lives. So first of all, you think about we get busy with busy work. There's all these things that get piled on our plate. We get to the end of the day and we know we did a bunch of stuff all day, but we're like, what did I actually accomplish today? Right. So when we fall into this cycle of busy work, that leads to reactive work. So in other words, we're reacting to the things that get thrown at us, the things that get stuck on our plate. So when we start with busy work and we have the mindset that I'm busy, it leads to this reactive work where we're not being proactive, which then leads to procrastination, but not the good procrastination. It leads to procrastination on the things that matter most, the things that we say are important to us. And then when we procrastinate on the things that matter most to us, that leads to burnout. We get burnout because we're so busy doing all these million different things, and yet we aren't seeing any progress towards the things that we say matters most to us. So in order to break that loop or that cycle that just tends to repeat itself over and over again, we have to start by getting clear, crystal clear about what matters most. What matters most.
Yeah.
And gonna give a brief story. I don't know if I've ever shared this story even internally with the team. Maybe I have, but so back pre-Ugly Mug days, when I had an actual job at one point, one of the things that was very common, it was a family-run business, wonderful people, super nice people, but every single morning around 9 o'clock, they would all go pour a cup of coffee and they would go sit outside and drink their coffee and visit. And wonderful and great conversations, great people. But what I discovered is they would sit out and drink coffee sometimes hour and a half sometimes. And again, wonderful conversations, great, interesting things being talked about. But what I discovered was every single time that I went out and sat and enjoyed a cup of coffee with them, I would end up getting home an hour and a half, 2 hours later because of
Mm.
that time. And so I made the decision. I said, you know what? I really enjoy these people. I like having these conversations, but I really prefer the time with my family. I really prefer having meaningful conversations with my family. And
Yeah.
so I stopped doing the coffee. And it was very offensive to them at first. But I explained to them, look, it's nothing personal. It's just that I want to be back home with my family. I don't want
Yeah.
to carry this work back home with me. And
Mhm.
so I think being crystal clear about what truly matters to us. Just last week, I was having a conversation and somebody was asking about my schedule, and I pulled it up and we were walking through my actual schedule for last week. And they were saying, well, like, how do you ensure that you get all that done? How do you ensure your meetings end on time? What if a meeting starts to run over? Like, what do you do in all these instances? And my response was, I would much rather give the parameters up front to people and say, hey, look, I've got an hour for this meeting. And
Yep.
then when 10 minutes are left, say, hey, look, don't mean to be rude, but we've got 10 minutes left. Then for me to have to carry that work home that didn't get done because I let that meeting run over, or I
Yep.
let that task, it doesn't even have to be a meeting, it could be a task. I let that task run over. And so, number one, we have to get crystal clear about what matters most. Number two, we have to then plan for what matters most. And I was actually talking to Megan this past, I don't remember what day this was, about planning. And she was just talking about how, we cover so much in the early days of Ugly Mug, onboarding, about scheduling and time blocking and all of these things. And
Yeah.
she said, from our team meeting, she said, I just never really thought about the fact that I need time on my calendar just to plan, just to
Yeah.
have these big blocks. And so that is so, so important. And what I can tell you though is that that time that we schedule to do that, to do the planning, it's never convenient and it's never easy. In other words, there's always something urgent screaming at us in those moments saying, you really shouldn't take the time to review or to plan today. You should really be, doing this urgent thing. And
Yeah.
so there's always these robbers that try to steal that. So number one, get clear. Number two, make sure that you are planning for what matters most. And then number three is you have to execute on what matters most. And
Mm.
again, that ties back into that very top thing, which is if your things that you say are the most important to you are truly the most important to you, then you're willing to fight and defend your time on their behalf.
Yeah. Yep. It's so true. I think, like, thinking about like what Megan said about having time on your calendar to plan, I tried to do that on Monday mornings, but Monday mornings are so hard because it's been the weekend and all of a sudden, the one client that I work with is like having an emergency and I need to like tend to everything there. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, but I didn't do this from last week. And I'm like, if I would have intentionally sat the time aside at the end of the day on Friday or even on Friday morning to say, all right, well, here's like realistically what I'm going to get done today. And here's everything I got done this past week. What actually needs to happen next week so that I can come in on Monday morning and already have had that conversation with myself instead of being so reactive to what's flooding into my inbox. And like I already like the plan for the week is already in place before the week has even started. And I think for me, I like last week was the first time that I really did that. And so then when this week came around, I was like, oh, well, this is already scheduled. This thing's already done. This is great. The ad's already running for coffee chats. Like I don't have to, before it was like I was trying to cram all of that into Monday morning on top of planning, on top of, and then I realized too, there are things that I'm consistently writing on my to-do list every Monday. And I'm like, well, this is the 5th week that I've written that I need to do that. Like, is there a better time for that to happen? Or this should just permanently be living on my calendar that I need to expect that I'm going to do that, but I also need to defend that. And one of the things that I've been trying really hard to defend is I go to the gym at lunch. That's the only time. Wesley goes to CrossFit in the morning. I don't want to go after work because I don't want to miss time with, Charlie at the end of the day. And so I'm like, all right, lunchtime is when I get to go to the gym. Like I'm like 45 minutes I need like at the gym to like do what I need to do. And I've been like trying really hard to like guard that and protect that and ensure that I'm doing everything I need to be doing when I'm supposed to be working so that I don't feel like I have to work through lunch and then skip the gym or, that I worked a little bit later into lunch. And so now I'm taking a shorter one. And so then I don't get because I'm like, I know that I need that for myself. Like that's something that's been really instrumental in my mental health and the structures of my day now since having a kid. And so, like protecting that time, actually being intentional about planning that. And then obviously like the execution of it all. Yeah, that's also good. So let's come back to procrastination, which we touched on. So like in the midst of these days and having, times that you're working on, you mentioned time blocking, like specific times for specific types of tasks and planning that, like how does procrastination fit into all of this in a positive way and not in that negative loop cycle that we can so often get into?
Yeah, great question. What I would say is that the place we have to start before we get to the procrastination is we have to understand all of these things that are taking place in our mind, all these loops that are on the back burner, right? They're in our head, the million different things we've got to accomplish or we've got to get done. So the best place for anyone listening or watching to start is simply this: grab a sheet of paper and start writing down every single thing that's on your quote unquote to-do list. It could be work, it could be personal, it could be the most random things that are back there in the back of your mind that you need to do, you want to do, you want to get to one day. Because what we don't understand and we don't realize is that those open loops continually run in the back of our mind. Oh yeah, I need to be doing this thing, or oh yeah, I can't forget about that. And when those open loops are running, what we don't realize is it's mentally draining us and we don't realize it. It's kind of like, when you leave your computer plugged in, it's using some of the power. Even though you're not using your computer, it's pulling some power, some electricity from the grid. The same thing happens with all of these things that are on our quote unquote to-do list. So by simply putting them out on paper, what it's doing is it's helping us to release some of those thoughts, because our brains then think, oh, you're giving attention to this thing. Therefore, I don't have to worry about it because you've given attention. You've put it on the paper. So you create your master list of all the things. Now, what I would tell you is this, that you really probably need 30 minutes to an hour just to do this successfully.
Wow. Okay.
To give yourself enough time to really think through all the areas of your life, all the things that you need to do today, you need to do this week, this month, this year, like all the things, to get those out on paper.
Is that how far out we should be thinking, like when we're doing this exercise? Like, or like, should we start at, hey, just thinking about today for our first time going through, or for this week, or should we be looking at it on like a quarterly or a yearly basis? Like, what should that look like, I guess, when we're getting started?
I think you're right. The best place to start is today. Like, what is today? Then move to what is this week, and then to this month, and then to this quarter. Now, I don't think going out further than that makes a big impact. At least it doesn't for me. I mean, there's things on my calendar, obviously, for later in the year, but really I try to look at it for the most part on a month-to-month basis. So I do a monthly review, and that is when that takes place. So again, it's once a month. I'm creating this master list of all the things I need to do. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go through that master list, and I want to identify what are the 10 or so things, 10 or less, that are truly important this next month. What are those 10 things? Sure, there's probably dozens of things on that list that are important. They're important things, but the reality is I don't have time for all of those things. So what are the top 10? The next thing I want to do is I want to go through that same list and I want to pull out the things that I'm saying it's okay to procrastinate on. I want to pull those things out. And I want what that does mentally for us is it says, these things, yes, they're important, but I'm giving myself permission to put them off at least for another month. In other words, next month when I sit down and review this again, I'll then decide, does this need to go on the calendar for this month or can this wait, another 30 days?
Yeah.
And again, by doing that, we are closing those mental loops that, although we don't realize it, are weighing us down mentally, emotionally. They're stressing us out. And we don't even know sometimes why we're feeling the way we're feeling. It's because we have all of this weight, this emotional, mental baggage that we're carrying day to day. And that simple act, it gives us permission to close those loops. Our brain says, you've acknowledged it, you've put it on paper, and you're okay with waiting and putting this off for at least 30 more days.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. There's been things that lately I'm like, that's really not the most important thing, but it feels really good to check those things off the list. If you're someone like me and you're like, I love a list, this sounds amazing, Wayne, but if you're also like me and you're like, how can I get the most amount of things checked off the list? And that really, it sounds like is not the mentality. It's more about prioritizing and really thinking about maybe your goals, even, if you're someone who's a business owner or is the head of a department and you're looking and thinking, hey, what is actually our goal? Like, what are the things on my to-do list that are going to help us move towards the goal? Or also, I like to think about that for my clients too. There are some tasks that they assign me and I'm like, hey, this is not the most important thing that we need to be focusing on right now. Or sometimes those will become very urgent things too that I want to focus on, but I'm like, I need to go back to the list and really think about what the priorities are and what the most important things are. And like you said, there are going to be so many things that we're like, everything on this list is important, right? But yeah, it is the reality check that you probably won't be able to get, especially if you're doing this for the first time and you're thinking about the day. There are only so many hours in the day, right? And there's so many, like, you really, really have to be intentional about figuring out what the truly most important things are, it seems like.
Absolutely. Because again, what happens when we don't identify those things is we end up falling into that checklist mentality of marking as many things as possible off of that to-do list, if you will. And the things that get pushed back every single time are the things that we would say, if we were really questioned and really thought about it, are the most important things to us. So if it's important to you, prove it with your calendar, right? There's that old adage that I can tell what you value based on your calendar and your bank account. Like where you spend your money and where you spend your time reveal your values. Yep. And so if you're frustrated and you're tired of living in this busy loop, this busy cycle, I would challenge you. I would say, look at your calendar and look at what you're feeding. In other words, is your calendar structured in such a way where you're feeding that busyness machine that is all consuming? It's never going to be, satisfied. There's always going to be something else to add to it. Or are you truly carving out time for what you say is most important to you?
Yeah. So with that idea in mind of looking at your calendar, how do we actually, when it comes to, we've got this list now, when it comes to actually putting it onto the calendar, what does that look like? What are some strategies like time blocking? I know we've mentioned a couple times now, like what does that actually look like on your calendar on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Yeah. So once you have your master list, you have your procrastination list, you've also identified the things that are truly important that you want to focus on over the next 30 days or so. The next thing that I love to have people walk through is all of the tasks. And you mentioned this earlier, all of the different tasks that have to be done on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis. So if we shift mentally now more so to thinking about our work lives, right? And then all the tasks we have to do at work. You want to create that list of all the different tasks. You also want to then put them in categories. So is it, client work? Is it internal communication? Is it financials? Is it whatever those categories are for you? We want to start creating these buckets of categories for the tasks that we do. We also want to identify with all of our tasks, is it a recurring task or is it a trigger task? In other words, something triggered this thing. I don't know when that trigger is going to happen, like when the emergency is going to take place. But the flip side of that is the recurring things, the things I know are going to happen on a recurring basis. So checking email, like how often should I actually be checking email every day? And so
Yeah.
what we do is we then take those recurring tasks and we break them into the following categories. I mean, you can have your own, but these are just some general guidelines. What are the things that should be done once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day? What are the things that should be done once a week? What are the things that should be done twice a week? What are the things that should be done 3 times a week? Monthly, once a month, twice a month, 3 times a month, quarterly. Like, so what that does is then it allows us, it creates these buckets for us to put things into. And then we can objectively look at those buckets and say, okay, I know I need to check my email 3 times a day. When does it make the most sense for me to put that on my calendar? Okay.
Yeah.
8 a.m. to 8:30. I'm going to check it first time. 11 till, I'm making this up, 11 to 11:30. I'm going to check it again. 4 to 4:30. I'm going to check it again. Those are my 3 times. So then on my calendar, I put that across my calendar every day.
Yeah.
Same thing with like financials or invoices. One example I think I gave when we talked about this internally was used to what would happen with invoices. Someone would send me something that we need to bill a client or adjust an invoice. And I would stop everything I was doing and I would go do that thing. Well, now I have what's called Financial Fridays. So everything gets put off to the time slot on Friday. And so somebody says something, unless it's a true emergency, it gets put off into that bucket on Friday. And again, it's very subtle. You would think that, it doesn't end up being the same amount of time if I do a little bit each day versus waiting and doing it all at the same time. And the answer is no, because of this thing called context switching.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
yeah, so context switching, the super high level version of this is that context switching comes from computer terminology where the information has to flow through the computer processor. And in the old days, there was only one path that information could go through, one core in the processor. And so the computer processor would have to switch back and forth between the 2 tasks. So if you were working on a Word document and then you were opening the internet, the processor has to switch back and forth between these things. And in that switching back and forth, it loses time. There's time that gets lost. There's a lag in that time. And that is the cost of the context switch, the switching from thing to thing. And here's what's true. The numbers vary, the arguments vary, but the reality is you always lose time when you change from thing to thing, from task to task. There's mental residue that gets carried over from the last thing that you were working on. And then there's the cost of focusing, right? The time and cost to get focused on the new thing.
Yeah.
And so if you're switching between 2 tasks, you no longer have 50% of your time to do this task and 50 to do this task. You now have 40% for this task and 40% for this task because you've lost 20% in that switch.
Yep.
So when it comes to time blocking, it's so important that we give ourselves buckets of time to focus on categories of things.
Yeah.
So if you're going to, write an email, why not schedule the other things that you can write in that same block of time? So, Thursday mornings from 9 to 11 is writing time. I'm going to write the emails. I'm going to write the copy for social. We create those buckets. So anyway, that's another whole thing that I don't think we realize, the cost of the context switching and the power of those buckets.
Yes. And I was like, yes, context switching, because yesterday I had that thought because I was in ads manager. I was, refreshing some campaigns, adding budget for a client, and I was in the zone. And then I realized that I needed to get something from my email for the ad. And so I went in my email, and then I got distracted by the 30 emails that had come in, since the morning. And I was sitting there and I started opening one, and then I started writing apply, and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm losing time. This doesn't even matter. It doesn't even need to be, it was nothing urgent. It did not say, Hannah, respond in 30 minutes or you're fired. It was nothing. It was something that could have waited until my email time after lunch, or honestly, even the end of the day. It wasn't anything that was urgent. And so then I just remember sitting there in that moment and I'm like, nope, just X out. Like the draft will save, just X out, get what you need to get and get out, Hannah, because my inbox for me is such a trap. Like that is probably the thing that if at the end of the day I'm leaving and I'm thinking about all 12 things that I didn't get to, it's because I was working out of my inbox that day. And I don't think that people realize that. I think that's the nature of a lot of people's work days is they're like, what do I have to do today? Well, whoever sent me an email or whatever fires I have to put out. And it's so incredibly distracting. And you don't realize that every time you go back to your inbox and start working out of that, it's robbing you of your time. Like you could be so much more productive if you would just have that time bucket for emails. And one thing at Ugly Mug that I've always really appreciated is like our expectation of like you need to respond to emails every 4 hours. And so that allows us to, I think, to easily have those buckets. Cause I'm like, I know if I check my email at AM and I'm checking it in again at noon or really, right before I go to lunch, I'm still going to be able to meet that expectation and respond. And I think a lot of like clients too, like really appreciate that. I feel like that's consistently something we get complimented on is everyone's so responsive, or quick response time, or I know I can always hear from you at the end of the day. And so I think that like having that expectation also allows us to have that category for ourselves, whereas other companies maybe don't have that expectation. I mean, sometimes I don't hear from people for weeks because, they don't have that expectation, or their inbox gets so piled and they're focused on whatever first 3 things they see when they log in at the end of the day, that if I emailed them 3 days ago, I mean, I'm probably not going to hear for another week, right? So I think that is all just so good in finding those buckets and that idea of context switching and realizing how much time you're really losing by doing that.
Yeah, it's a very powerful concept once you understand it and you actually choose to believe it. Like there's all kinds of science that proves that it's a reality. We know it's true, but sometimes we feel so much more quote unquote productive when we get those dopamine hits from jumping from thing to thing, right? The thing in the inbox makes us feel like a sense of accomplishment. It's something exciting. It's something like,
Check off the
oh,
list.
yeah, check it off the list. But that is how we always end up at the end of the day with a long list of little things checked off the list. And yet we feel so frustrated because we put off the things that matter truly most to us in our work life, in our family life, and whatever else it may be. So I would just challenge people to, first of all, admit that you have the power to make these changes. That, I don't know somebody who may work for another entrepreneur, another organization. I don't know any other business owner who, if an employee came to them and said, look, I'm really focusing on being more productive, accomplishing the things that are going to move the needle, the things that are going to help us accomplish the goals that I have for my role, for my department, whatever it may be. I don't know of any entrepreneur out there who's going to say, no, don't do that. Like I would rather you spend all day in your inbox jumping from thing to thing versus would it be okay if I don't respond for 4 hours? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right. So we have to give ourselves permission and sometimes let go of those excuses. Well, my boss expects it, or I could never do that because if those thoughts cross your mind, like I could never do that because, I would challenge you. I would say that's probably an excuse.
Yeah.
You probably can.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, we have covered a lot today, y'all. And I feel like if you've been watching this the whole time live or you're coming back and catching bits and pieces in the replay, there really is a good framework here for what you can do in order to build and craft this perfect ideal week that is suited and tailored towards the goals that you need to accomplish for yourself personally, but also the goals and things that you need to accomplish at work too. And we've talked about creating that master list and then building those categories and around it, and then how we can go through and say, all right, is this a trigger task or is this something that needs to be done 1, 2, 3 times a week? Same thing for months or for the quarter, for the year, whatever it may be. We have some really good frameworks built in. So thank you so much, Wayne, for sharing all of this wisdom with us. I know that it's probably a huge mental shift for people. And it still is for me at times, even though this is something that, we teach at the very beginning, like training here at Ugly Mug. It is so easy to get distracted by all of those things that feel urgent. But really having this framework and foundation to come back to is incredibly helpful. So if this feels intimidating for you as a viewer, you can get there. Baby step progress, right? Like maybe you, like Wayne said, we just start looking at this day and we just brain dump everything onto a sheet of paper. Maybe that's today. Then we go back and we categorize tomorrow and kind of like figure this out and muddle through it, because it's not going to be perfect. And you might find too that some of those categories that you have in place, actually, they really aren't relevant. Or maybe that actually is a task that you're currently doing 3 times a week, but you only need to be doing once a week. Like Wayne mentioned about doing invoices and dropping everything that he was doing. And then now just having Finance Friday, which I love that you have a name for that. We should just have a name for every day like that. But yeah, so much good stuff here. Thank you again, Wayne. Thank you to everyone who joined us live or caught the replay. Next week, we are going to be back again for coffee chats at our normal scheduled time on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm going to be talking with our operations manager, Mara. Mara is going to be sharing all kinds of leadership wisdom with us, and I am really excited to dive into that conversation with her next week. If you guys have any questions or you want to learn more about productivity, I'm sure Wayne has umpteen million books that he would recommend on these topics. And so we will drop links to some of those in the comments here on YouTube and on Facebook and on LinkedIn after the show. Thanks again, y'all. Oh yeah. Do you have something?
Yeah. 2 quick things. Number one, if you want, we have some like worksheets that we actually worked through with this. If you want this, message us on one of the platforms. Let us know you want a copy. We'll send it's a PDF document. You can have it. Number 2, and I just want to point this out. So normally you do coffee chats on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. our Central Time, 11 a.m. your time. And you asked me if I could do yesterday. And my response was, can we push it back a day? And the reason is this: yesterday was my review day. And so I wanted to be on coffee chats. I enjoy the conversations on coffee chats, but I also know the importance of protecting that review day time. So again, that's an example. I'm bringing that up to say, sometimes you have to be willing to say no and ask for a compromise on the request based on what is on your calendar. So I didn't tell you exactly why I asked to move it back a day, but that's the reason why, because yesterday morning was the time that I was going through my master list. I was going through what got accomplished, what didn't get accomplished. So sorry for the long-winded ending, but I just think that's a very important point to say, look, you sometimes have to defend those times and you have to renegotiate and re-ask to move things based on your priorities.
Yes. And more often than not, I feel like people are afraid to ask to reschedule because they think that's the only time, or that's that's it. And sometimes things can wait, or people are flexible, and it can be pushed back, and it's totally fine. And I love that. I didn't know that's what you were doing yesterday. You were just like, can we move it? I was like, sure.
Yeah. That's it.
What a great living example to end the episode with. Well, cool. Well, thanks again, Wayne. Thank you to all our viewers. We will catch y'all next week, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central for another edition of Coffee Chats. Bye, everyone.